our chair, Professor Amar Farooqui, and all the distinguished speakers, Professor Alok Prasad, Professor Sanghamitra Misra, and Dr. Vikas, please grace the stage.
कौन सा नहीं हाँ वो नहीं आया क्या
Now, to begin with the short introductions, Professor Amar Farooqui, who would be the chair for this session. Farooqui sir, he was a professor in the University of Delhi. He has completed his PhD from History Department, University of Delhi in the year 1990. He has also been a fellow at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, New Delhi, and member secretary of the Indian Council of Historical Research, New Delhi, from April to October 2008. His publications include the popular work which most of us have read, Early Social Formations, published in 2002, Smuggling as Subversion, Colonialism, Indian Merchants, and the Politics of Opium, 1790 to 1843, published in 2005, Opium City, The Making of Early Victorian Bombay, published in 2006, and Zafar and the Raj, Anglo-Mughal Delhi, circa 1800 to 1850, published in 2013. Now I would like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Alok Prasad. Professor Alok Prasad is currently the head of the Department of Medieval and Modern History, University of Allahabad, and coordinator, Jawaharlal Nehru Center for Differently Abled Students, University of Allahabad. He has done his higher studies at the University of Delhi, JNU, and the University of Allahabad. He is currently working as a professor with the Department of Medieval and Modern History, University of Allahabad. He has been awarded the Award of Excellence by the University of Allahabad in 2016 for his distinguished teaching and academic contributions. He has done research work at Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, as associate from 2016 to 2017. Recently, in 2021, he was appointed as the expert member of the Board of Studies of the new postgraduate programs on archival studies and management, Asian studies, diaspora studies, and history of science, and Kashi studies and culture by the Department of History, Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi. Now, our second speaker, Professor Sanghamitra Misra. Sanghamitra ma'am teaches history at the Department of History, University of Delhi. She is the author of the book Becoming a Borderland, The Politics of Space and Identity. Identity in Colonial Northeastern India was published in 2011 by Routledge. Her work has been published in academic journals including the Indian Economic and Social History Review, Studies in History, the Economic and Political Weekly, and the Modern Asian Studies, and in different other journals as well. Now, the third speaker of this session, Dr. Vikas Rathee, is an assistant professor in the Department of History, Central University of Punjab. He did his PhD from the University of Arizona in the year 2015 and was a postdoctoral fellow at the Asian Studies and Truman Center, Hebrew University of Jerusalem from 2014 to 2016. His works include articles like Cosmopolitan Particularism, Mohammadi Pranat, Dawa, and Laldas Bitter in Purusharth, which was published in 2015, and co-authored article Bonds of Gadchiroli in the Indian Federal Structure Between Identity and Development in the Ravindra Bharati Journal of Philosophy. Now, I would request Professor Amar Farooqui as the chair to continue with this.
tribe laws and Pasi community in North India. Good afternoon to all of you. First of all, I express my deep gratitude to Department of History and particularly Professor Baba and the department for inviting me to this important seminar held on 100 years of this great department. I was also a student at one of the atmospheric colleges of this university, Hindu College. So it's all the more a personal importance for me. The topic that I'm going to speak is there in the abstract that is submitted to you. So first I'll start with some disclaimer, and this is that I'm not talking about the social history of Pasi community and far less about social history of criminality in India, colonial India. I'm essentially talking about the way in which the elite members of the Pasi community have looked at their stigmatized colonial past. This is important, as in whenever we look at the communities, we usually look at them from structural perspective and often ignore their inner experience of stigma or inner experience of their criminality. All these things are usually ignored. So my purpose in exploring this little explored theme of colonial policy and criminality in colonial India, that is, it's very specific to retrieve this the social memory that is embedded in the writings of people belonging to the community which has been branded as a criminal held by the colonial rule. Actually, there were 200 criminal communities which were branded as criminal. The members of those communities were treated as criminal by birth. They were treated as hereditary criminals. They were in the official records. They are called as dangerous classes. They are also called predatory classes. And such kind of words are used for them. And you'll be surprised to know that most Indians got independence in 1947, but those people who was branded as born criminals or the criminal tribes of India, they got actually the real independence in 1952. Because even in 1947, when this criminal tribe inquiry report was published, even at that time, the UP criminal tribe record, this inquiry committee report, is still wondering whether we should repeal this criminal tribe act which was enacted in 1871 or not. So at that time, they of course were thinking of notions of justice since India became independent. So all things. So there's a moral pressure on the government to decriminalize, or in the official word, denotify this tribe, because these criminals, the criminal tribes were actually proper open public notification in the police gazette was published for them, for the world to know, for the officers to know that such and this entire social group is a criminal. So coming to the general background, research has shown that in the colonial period there were at least 3 processes which oppressed communities, particularly the marginalized communities. We had sedentarization, we had traditionalization, we had demilitarization. All these 3 processes, there must be, this is not exhaustive in this. But because of the colonial imperative of exploitation and control of communities, especially the communities which resisted them, or communities which in some way were an obstacle to their economic exploitation. For example, many tribal communities became criminal just because they collected their forest produce. It was their livelihood issue before these laws were made. But overnight they were turned into criminals. Now, if they collected some kind of material resources from the forests, then they were declared criminal and they were punished. They were jailed, imprisoned. So these processes were there, but specifically, if we talk about the criminal tribes, then contrary to the common notion that criminality was actually biologically determined, the question of criminality in the colonial times was very much determined by the British perception, colonial perception of castes. For the colonial authorities, caste was the fundamental thing to understand the social behavior in India, and therefore, according there are of course several theories, but this is the dominant official discourse. And the dominant official discourse was that in caste system, different tribes have different occupations or trades. And from ancient times immemorial, from the ancient times, different tribes have different occupations, and these occupations, different castes have different occupations, and these occupations in course of time were legitimized by religion and social customs, and therefore the criminal behavior of certain people, it was in a sense generalized, and entire social groups were branded as criminals. It was thought that it is now a moral duty, because caste is very important, so it is to do crime has become a moral duty of all these castes. And one such caste was the Pasi caste, about which I'll be talking about. Now, I'll just read out one important, because this is an important thing I've mentioned. So, while making the Criminal Type Act 1871, J.V. Stephens, the law member of Government General Council, says the special feature of India is caste system. As it is, trades go by castes. A family of carpenters will be carpenters. A century or 5 centuries hence, if they last so long, keeping this in mind, the meaning of professional criminal is clear. So there is no doubt in his mind that it is determined by the caste. It means a tribe whose ancestors were criminal from times immemorial, who are themselves destined by the status of the castes, that is religious sanction, to commit crime, and their descendants will be offenders against law until the whole tribe is exterminated or accounted for in the manner of things. When a man tells you, therefore, that he is an offender against law, he has been from the beginning and will be so till the end. That is, reform is impossible. For it is his trade. That is, commit crime is his trade, his caste. I may also say his religion to commit crime. So, therefore, when certain groups are looked upon as fundamentally criminal, the laws also for them were very, very harsh. And when we talk about the laws, I'll just briefly mention, because I'll be talking about the Pasi community. But if we come to the laws, what kind of laws were there? From 1871, this Criminal Tribe Act was established, and subsequently it was amended in 1897, then 1911. Finally, in 1924, it was codified. And the year of independence, 1947, this law is not abolished, rather this again one law is made, which is of course an amending law. So this entire criminal law, it was there, and it was there in 1952. So there are 3 aspects of the criminal laws. I'll be talking this very briefly. One is aimed at identification, surveillance, and restrictions of mobility of the so-called criminal tribes. Right? When we say criminal tribe, it means that entire groups are branded as criminals. The person born in this tribe, in a criminal tribe, was, as per law, required to register in UP. It was because it was as per the states. In UP, at the age of 15, he has to register himself at the police station. So specifically, if any government wanted to declare any community as a criminal, then they have to notify, simply notify. And although this word, very funny word, reason to believe, if there is a reason to believe that any class is addicted to committing non-bailable offence, then the government, through notification in Gazette, will declare them criminal tribe. Now there's a funny thing here. This reason to believe is very, very arbitrary. Because Shad Mayaram, in this book, Against History and State, he's talked about the Meos and how Meos were criminalizing. And see, Meo in the early British reports, Meo community, they were in the early British reports, they are seen as cultivators, simple cultivators. But since they were not being able to controlled by the state, they were in the late 19th century criminalized. Why? And reason to believe that they were criminals was that in medieval times, one of their ancestors married a person from Meena community, and Meena community was a criminal community. Therefore, marrying a person from criminal community or some kind of marital or blood relation with a person of criminal community also makes you criminal. So this reason to believe was very arbitrary. And of course, in the case of South India, Meena Radhakrishna has also pointed similar kind of arbitrariness in determining certain tribes, social groups as born criminals, hereditary criminals, or addicted to crimes, such all these notions, all this. So notification, and then after the notification is done by the government, then the registers were made. The person whose community was declared as a criminal tribe, they have to get themselves, it was onus on them to register themselves in the official register of criminal tribe or of their district. Not only that, from 1911, they also have to give their fingerprints in the police thana of their area. And of course, the government has this right to settle these communities, deport these communities to certain areas, including certain reformatory settlements. And the government had also this right to make rules as to the limits in which this particular community will stay. For example, say X member of X community, X criminal community is there. So it will be declared by the government that this person will not go outside a particular area. If the person X goes to another area, then he has to get this pass. There was a passport system, permit system, passport system. He has to get this pass from the government, and then only with the permission of the local thana. And then when he reaches to the other area where he is his destination, then he has to show this pass there, also inform the thana there. And at the same time, the local elite, the headmen, the prominent people of village were enjoined as per these laws to inform the police about the movement of this person. So you can see how much this whole notion of, although it is very conventional now, that the colonial state India was semi-hegemonic. So that entire notion, if you look from the perspective of this community, is a farce, because the people do not have any civil liberties to speak of. And there was a system of roll calls, roll calls also, and then, and of course, the surveillance was not close surveillance, indirect surveillance. It was open surveillance. Open surveillance means that, for example, that if a person visits a relative to some other area, then he has to report, not only report at the police station, but also if the police patrols that area in the night, then he has to mark his presence to them by shouting that, okay, I'm here, I'm here. In fact, there's an important instance of that. So apart from that, there are penal laws. no court of justice was allowed to redress any of the grievances of the members of the criminal committee. So there was a protection against judicial review. So all the talk of equality, of equal protection of law and equality before law, all this talk is a farce in case of criminal communities. There were, of course, the third type of provisions which were about reclamation and reform, which are officially called ameliorative provisions. These provisions were there, but all the official reports, including the UP Criminal Tribe Inquiry Report and Criminal Tribe Inquiry Report of 1949 of Government of India, they universally say that the penal and surveillance provisions of this law were efficiently implemented. But as far as the welfare, it is ameliorative provisions of this law, they were not implemented simply because the government did not have enough resources. So there's a calculation by one Deputy Secretary from UP government, M. Siddiqui. He says that on an average, the police spent 120 rupees on the criminal tribes. But all this money was essentially spent on maintaining the establishment of surveillance and reclamation department, which was supposed to reclaim and reform these people. So effectively, there was no relief, there was no relief from any side. So since I'm talking about the literature from the Pasi community, so there's only 5 minutes left. So I won't talk too much about this. I'll talk now about this, how the colonial rulers immobilized and kept the criminal in a state of semi-bondage. How does the members of Pasi community, especially the educated persons, look at this? For this, I have used, there are about 30 books written by this committee. Some of this were informed to you by Professor Badinaran. Some of these books are there in the Benefit Center in Allahabad, Fund Social Science Research Institute. I, on my own personal fieldwork, I collected some 10 books. So there are about 30 books that I have come across. And what is my conclusion about how a community looks at its quote-unquote criminal past or stigmatized criminal past? I think my conclusion is that first strategy that the community has adopted is erasure from the memory. Because out of these 30 books, only 7 actually talk about this Criminal Types Act. The word that is used in these are Hindi books. The word is not Aparadhik Jati Kanun. The word is Jarayam Peshevar Kanun. Jarayam means those criminal. Jarayam means Aparadhik, criminal, and Peshevar means professional. So it is, the word that is used is Jarayam Peshevar Kanun. It is looked upon as a black law. Kala Kanun, this is what is used. But of course, as I said, only 7 out of 30 books. So this brings to me, in a different context, Chandra Tumbe, in his book about epidemics, he says that when a community faces some kind of a tragic event in the past, then it goes through 4 stages. First is non-acceptance or denial. Okay, there's nothing like this. Then second stage is confusion. Okay, this event has happened, what is to be done about it? And then the third is acceptance and response to it. But the fourth is when certain tragic event is passed away and after 2-3 decades, there's also erasure for this. So I think the first strategy used by the community is erasure from the memory, erasure from the social memory or collective memory of the community. But at the same time, the second thing that in this kind of discourse that we see in these books is that in order to downplay the stigma of criminality, and of course also untouchable because this is untouchable Dalit caste. Thus, the writers of these books who talk about the caste histories, they actually they emphasize the glorious ancient and medieval past of the community. They talk about how the Pasis were Rajas and all those things. But more importantly, they emphasize the role of the Pasis in the freedom struggle. In fact, this entire act of criminalization of Pasis is narrated as a story of struggle against the colonial rule, and the colonial rule then becoming angry, vindictive, and then imposing this one of the harshest law of colonial times. So they have in a sense overturned this entire criminality as a kind of a narrative of struggle against exploitation, of course not only against the British rule but also the local elite. So of course, just in 2 minutes, less than 2 minutes actually. So what is the third strategy? Third strategy, of course, acceptance. Yes, there was a criminal past. That was bad. It was a tragic past. But then how to respond to it? One response is that one writer has said that it quoted some biological data, for example, study of blood groups, to say that, on the basis of scientific study of blood groups, one can say the Pasis were not criminals. The blood group type of the Pasis is not those of criminals. Now this is very funny because the British never, British mainstream discourses about caste. It's not about anthropometry or biological determinism. Right? So and then second, fingerprints. That fingerprints of the Pasis do not. It proves that they are not criminal. All these things, the arguments that they have given. But otherwise, they have fiercely rejected this criminalization of their caste, and they have narrated experiences. That's why it's important to read these books, because there's a kind of a collective social memory embedded. Though much of it is erased, but still it's a collective social memory is there. And so finally what can we conclude about this? See, first thing is that the communities which were criminalized have a grievance not only against the colonial state but also the local elite, because they lament that even the nationalists did not say anything in order to abolish the law, and this law continued to be the law of the land even after 1947. So this is one thing that they constantly lament. And then they say that, and they of course they reject this criminality and this entire notion of stereotyping this. And of course there are certain, when something becomes stereotyped, because this criminality, alleged classical criminality, is continuing in the post-independence period. So there are certain programs which are actually caste slurs in this community. So there's an interesting book in which caste slurs are mentioned against Pasis, that they are thieves and all these things. And then it is said that how to talk back to them, how, if one says all these things, how to talk back. So this discourse is also therefore a discourse of resistance against oppression, very much. So with this I will end. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. I now invite Sanghamitra to be speaking on Conquest, community, and ethnogenesis in colonial Northeast.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be part of this very important moment in the life of this department. I am taking off from the last paper from where in some ways there's a lot of resonance. I'm also speaking about the colonial state, about the tribe, about law to an extent. And I don't think the organizers know, but Alok and I were classmates in JNU. We a very small class of modern Indian history students. So it's nice to see that we followed similar interests in our research life. So this paper is about. It comes I remember in the morning colleagues talking about how their paper kind of emerges from ongoing work, and this is very much part of work that I have been engaged with for the last now many years, and I'm hoping that I'm seeing the end of some light at the end of the tunnel, and it is nearing completion. So yes, very welcome any comments. I mean, all comments, suggestions, to make it better. So it is this paper is. I'll read out in parts, and I'll try to kind of extrapolate from what I read out. The paper is about the history of the sovereign community and the loss of their sovereignty under British rule in colonial northeastern India. It is therefore also about understanding the character of the colonial state and the strategies of colonial conquest, about how the exercise of military violence was coterminous with the assumption of sovereignty by the East India Company. Just brief 20 minutes, but the larger purpose of my work is to really look at how the project of colonial knowledge and formation is actually underpinned, determined by a very violent militarization that one sees, and which in turn is determined by the kind of profit making that the East India Company and later, of course, the state, colonial state, seeks to make in various. So it's political economy, militarization, determined, playing a very important role in the manner in which colonialism unfolds in northeastern India, and I would argue various other analogous spaces. So it is about finding the relationship between processes of state ethnogenesis and the colonial political economy. There will I'll also have to allude to the idea of legal primitivism, anthropology, and the construction of the category of the legal category of the hill tribe. Towards the end, if there's time, I would like to speak very briefly about the very important historical role that political rebellion from a community can play in this creation of the category of a hill tribe. Now, the community that I speak about today were the Garos. In my work, I do engage with other communities like the Pochers, Hajongs, Khasis, who shared political and political space with the Garos, or who inhabited similar areas and whose histories entwined with each other. For today, I'll focus on the Garos alone. This paper, since the Garos were categorized as a tribe, as a hill tribe, rather by the colonial and later by the post-colonial state, we will also have to reflect on the historicity and the modernity of the concept of the tribe. Of course, scholars have written extensively on this, sociologists, anthropologists, historians, about the need to probe the Germanness, right, of the tribe, and how the idea of a hill tribe has been kind of embedded, has often been the product of embedding ethnicity in natural habitats, so-called natural habitats, by the colonial state. There have also been, of course, a lot of work which have historicized the idea of the periphery, ecological peripheries, forests, pastorals, hills, and how they come to be constituted in history, and how these peripheries are really about civilizational and ethnic boundaries, how they transform into very important civilizational and ethnic boundaries. So I will draw upon this very rich extent, academic literature, but I also want to mark some significant historiographical departures along the way. I hope I will succeed in convincing you when I mark them. So yes, this when I see, the history of the Garos would go back into the pre-colonial, and I'll come to that. But in the archive, they appear in around 1788. Though, but there are earlier references in the writings of this French traveler Chevalier from the 1760s onwards, and therein lies a very interesting point that about the colonization of eastern and northeastern India. There has been this very strong trend in extant historiography which continues, that when you study the history of northeastern India, and here when I say northeastern India, I'm thinking not of the 7 states that comprise of it, but also a large area, of course, around. I'm thinking of Rangpur, I'm thinking of large parts of Bangladesh, and of course, adjacent areas of Bhutan, and on the other side as well, but Chittagong and so on. That colonization begins somewhere in the 3rd quarter of the late 19th century, and I disagree very strongly with this view. I have shown, and I'm trying to show more in my work, that you have to trace it literally to the years around Buxar, 1760s. And there are others like David Ludden who've also been working along these lines. So it is that you have to trace this history of drawing jurisdictional lines between hills and valleys, this divide that is created to actually the 1760s and the 1770s. So one needs to go further back in history to trace these very important moments. So what exactly the question that drove me, and I have said this elsewhere as well, is that when you come upon the Garos in these early records, they are nowhere mentioned as the primitive, the savage, the hill tribe, none of this, of course. So in the 1780s and 90s, when the first East India Company officials climbed the hills from the Sylhet side, from the Bengal side of the plains, they are talking about a community of agriculturalists, peasants, traders, and so on, right? And then you see how, we are also told how this community produces thousands of mounds of cotton, and as I will show, that they play a very important role, not just in the Eastern trade network, but they are producing a commodity of great value, and in turn that will determine not just their own sovereign selves, but also a larger, the regional political economy, the Mughals, and the Zamindars of the lowlands. They have a very significant role to play. Now, having said that, when you pan the historical lens to the late 19th century, what you see is a very different figure. The figure that most historians see, because that is where most of our history, unfortunately, in northeastern India and other parts have begun, which is that you see the figure of a savage, right? That very ubiquitous, necessary savage of colonial conquest that is always a part of any imperial narrative, and this image of a recalcitrant hill raiding, hill guard. Hill is always the term, the epithet used. Has been dyed into colonial knowledge and official policy, and it offers you that redoubtable rationale for intervention. So when you see them in the late 19th century, theirs is an identity completely estranged from the plains, right? No, so the question that we always, anyone who's worked on something for almost now close to a decade, like I have, will tell you that there's always something that drives you, and this was the one question that took me to this work. How did a community who are producing and selling such an important commodity, when the company first comes upon them in the 18th century, become in the records of the same company and of the colonial state, these inhabitants of wild districts. So this is the story, this story of the elision of the Garo cotton producer from the archive is what I've been tracing, in my work. And I would also like to kind of just flag that it's missing from extant historiography. The Garos sometimes make a cameo appearance, but they are not recognized as a pre-modern polity or as a very important, as playing a very important role in the regional political economy. Also, this story of Garo cotton sovereignty and collective resistance appears to have vanished altogether from contemporary memory, from myths and oral history, which are taken by contemporary historians as important sources for writing alternative histories. So I turn to the archive. This paper, I want to now quickly say that it will be largely obviously between the 1760s and the 1900s, my area of familiar expertise. But we have to, if we wish to, as modern Indian historians, if we wish to historicize the career of the tribe in colonial India, we must begin in the pre-colonial. Now, the pre-colonial, of course, we access through the colonial archive, so it is mediated through it. There are problems, challenges, we can talk about that. But a certain careful reading of pre-colonial sources, I think without that, what we produce might often, as what we can, we kind of, we often produce very ahistorical, unpermeable kind of categories. This is, evident in some, again, if it comes up in the questions, I can talk about it at length, but some more recent work from India on the tribe, where this bind of the hill plain diet has continued to generate very ahistorical readings of communities, or for example on the primitivization of the Santal community under colonial modernity. If we do not have a robust inquiry into what is the pre-colonial political economy, the simple question of what exactly is disrupted in Santal life by colonialism remains unexplained. So then the community, rebellion, everything can slip into some kind of ahistorical other of the Bengal plains. So this is, so when I begin in the pre-colonial, there are sources, some sources in the form of Mughal, chronicles, the Baharastani Garbi. There are others where the Garos are mentioned as a community who fought with the Mughals, of several thousand pikes, local leaders, so on. Then there are also in some, some of the Ahom Burunjis. Again, the problems with how these Burunjis are actually. They come to be kind of invented, constituted, of course, in the mid-20th century. Nevertheless, just to say that Garos do surface there as political contemporaries of the Ahoms. Now, when we, from the mid-18th century, like I already said, there are very interesting records of European travelers and of the first East India Company officials, where there are descriptions of the Garo assemblies, right? And of the Garo, the creation of authorities through, the tributes on the plains, the lowlands that they controlled, and how they marked their sovereign presence in the pre and early colonial political landscape of Eastern India. There are, like I said, along with the descriptions of their collective assemblies, there is, which are, of course, expressions of their collective political will. We are told about their oath-taking, how, and basically that they appear as a people with, place of politics, a demonstrated will to assemble. They confer upon themselves the authority to rule upon what is just and what is unjust. Now, and of course, these we can, there are also notions of group sovereignty about whether it's territorially fixed or not that one can talk about. So, significantly for me, the fact that this irrefutable sovereignty of the Garos comes to be hinged on the production and sale of green cotton. I have written elsewhere at length about the kind of, very evidently very prosperous, prosperous cotton trade, cotton production that the Garos were part of. If one needs figures, makes me, I almost feel kind of very proud possessive about these, figures that 100,000 mounds of cotton produced by them in one season, which was more than what a district like Narayanganj in Bengal produced. There are descriptions of high rates of Rathee duties, and essentially cotton as a measure and currency for all articles traded in the huts, mounds of cotton bartered for necessities. We of course know that societies that have barter are invariably the ones that also know the use of money. So the Garos practice barter among a variety of other economic systems, and cotton also at various moments has the function of commodity money. What you see then at this point of time is not just that there is a prosperous cotton trade, but how is it connected to Garo sovereignty? And for that, there's some sense of what is the character of Mughal sovereignty in these parts of Eastern India. That's what we need to have. Where Mughal sovereignty here lays absolute claims on the territory of does not lay absolute claims on the territory of the Garo Hills. But it certainly spreads itself on the lowlands below. And what we see is how cotton is a very important item in the peshkash that is paid by the lowland zamindars to the Mughal Fauj. Now, this consignment of cotton comes from the Garo Hills, which meant that the Garos had a very determining role in the regional political order. Now, I have just, is it already 5 minutes left? I've just, you're enjoying it so much that I want to obviously go on, and I can understand how it's so painful to get this. I'm wondering if we, did some garbage. Anyway, so the very essence of these, so I will not go into details. I hope you'll ask me lots of questions. But the very essence of these zamindaris as tributary zamindaris. That is the point that I want to make here. That these fairly powerful, chieftains, zamindars / chaudharis, whatever you call them, but the various grades of military ranks that were conferred on them was actually determined by the Mughal state vis-a-vis the kind of military prowess they showed against the Garos, or how, there's a whole complicated system of advances through which cotton was brought from the Garo hills and paid by these tributary zamindars to the Falstaff. So essentially to say that the Garos are no mean marauders of forested hills, nor are they politically isolated communities in any way living in some state of perpetual conflict, which is often a standard association in the discourse of individual. Now, quickly to come to to colonialism, which I have already kind of anticipated, that it appears as a violently disruptive force. It alters the world of this agricultural community through the aggressive force of conquest. So I just quickly read out a paragraph. I think that's more efficient. The exercise of military violence, was, as I said earlier, was coterminous with the assumption of sovereignty by the East India Company in the lowlands around the Garo Hills, and then it extends further into the hills through the 19th century. So the cotton production and trade of the agricultural Garos, subjected to continuous military and fiscal jurisdiction of the colonial state. Then cotton markets emerge as densely militarized spaces, sites of abjection, where all signs of Garo sovereignty had to be finally abandoned and primitivism reinforced. For those, then there were of course collective fines, trade blockades, scorched-earth policies that ordered the burning of standing crops as punishment. Further, you then had, imperial violence takes the form of massacres, public hangings, deportation to the prisons in Andamans and Burma for life, burning of homes and crops, and a policing of the quotidian life of Garos. So, historians have also, the point then is that coercion was the essence of colonial law and constituted the singular logic of colonialism. Historians have of course argued otherwise. If you think about historians writing on colonialism's forms of knowledge, we know that we've been told that the brute force of military and economic conquest was temporally and substantially different from the schematically later stage of the constitution of these forms of knowledge, and that is exactly what I refute. I think it's very difficult to sustain this distinction. So what we find, in the subjugation of communities such as and when I say such as the Garos, I'm thinking of Mymensingh, Chittagong, Bhagalpur, Khasi Hills, Kachar Valley. I do refer to these areas and work, how the endemic state of colonial violence, there's a mutual constitution and interdependence between colonial knowledge and the violence of conquest. The same thing gets played out in anthropology. All these big anthropologists, Edward Dalton, Francis Jenkins, John Eliot, who wrote extensive articles on the Garos in professional journals of anthropology, were also colonial officers who might have just burnt a village, taken tribute, and so on, deeply implicated in the project of conquest. So finally, this one last thing, which is about how these military lines that are drawn between, the political and juridical lines that segregate hills from the plains were also, of course, very deep, militarily etched. So whether you segregate the Sylhet lowlands from the Khasi hills, or you segregate the Garo hills from the Brahmaputra plains, these create zones of exceptions, segregate the hills as a discrete jurisdictional space. All of these, I think, and then you kind of attribute a legal primitivism to them. These kinds of what are often very sanitized, we call spatial kinds of transformation are actually, kind of deep military expeditions. So how many? 1 more minute? Okay. Just the last thing with which I wanted to share with you, because that when we talk about state ethnogenesis of the Garos, state ethnogenesis of the Garos, of how they are created, I think it is impossible, I've tried to work not obviously with an essentialized notion of a Garo community, but with one that is forged both by colonial power and in resistance to it, and there I have tried to examine the economic rationale of peasant insurgency, right? That peasant insurgency in the Garo hills, and there is endemic, kind of the peasant resistance in the hills is, again, it's not just the hills, it goes towards Mymensingh, what you famously know as the, what were called the Pagalpanthi rebellions, Garos play a very important role in it. And the community is being continuously forged on this anvil of resistance, right? right? So it is not as if you know so there are the Garos of the 15th century are not obviously the Garos we are talking about in the 19th century, right? So there is a continuous process of becoming or whatever. This resistance itself is a measure of how a measure of peasant politics as much as of the values of the colonial state. And So obviously the argument that disparate acts of primitive violence, so headhunting, raids, all of these, I try to argue that they actually constitute an assembling of the first of a series of sustained peasant rebellions in this part of colonial India. Now, these rebellions are specifically about the control of river ports, claims to resources of lowlands, increased taxes on cotton, starvation induced by trade blockades, and so on. So all of this is what in the Pagalpanthi rebellion, which takes place, in the 1820s, in the lowlands of Mymensingh, but also that's basically northeastern Bengal, you have the character of Tipu Pagal, right? Who was, the rebel leader, who is, of course, finally jailed and hung. Now, there was an epithet that was kind of attached to his name. He was called Tipu Garo in some colonial archives. Now, one of the immediate responses of historians was, of course, that this couldn't be the case because Tipu was not a Garo, and this is clearly an error in the archives, on the part of the magistrate who had conducted this long inquiry after the rebellion and so on. My argument, however, would be that it might not have been the error that we think it is. Tipu could well have claimed to be a Garo in the historical context of early 19th century Mymensingh and the Garo Hills, because and here I'm drawing upon the works of someone like Stuart Gordon, but also Edmund Leach, a lot of anthropologists and historians, also a large number from Southeast Asia working on Burma as well, who thought about what it means, how was identity perceived, ethnic identities, that they were determinate, but they could also be, they could also be transient and not permanent. So it is not to say that for example, Edmund Leach says that you could be, it is not clear, it is clear enough that they were Kachin and Karen and Chin. What was not clear was where one began and another ended, and whether they had been Kachin and Karen in the previous generation and whether they would remain so in the next. So for Tipu, on the other hand, similarly, I would argue that categories tend to acquire meanings in context, and the synonymity of Garo with indigenous sovereignty and a steady politics of resistance could have encouraged other communities to appropriate the same term as an autonym. So to be a Garo in the early 19th century was to mark political identity and difference, to resist and rebel in an unrelenting manner against the colonial state. So in that sense, the epithet Garo for Tipu could have been a sign of affinity with the politics of insurrection. And this is exactly what Stuart Gordon actually says for the Bhils, when he says that originally it referred to a specific group of tribals, but over time it came to mean any group of turbulent woods dwellers, right? So, yes, that is what I wanted to present before you today, how the category of a Garo, when you historicize it, acquires a polysemic character, appearing first as a valley state exonym under the colonial state, and then as a badge of political loyalty, and
Rathee will be speaking on studying medieval India up to date vernacular terms, comparing data from Punjab and Rajasthan.
Thank you. A very good afternoon to all of you. Like many other people before me, I am also somebody who has been at Delhi University as an undergrad. And like the rest of this panel, I went to JNU also. And today I'm back here. And sometimes I think, whether I was supposed to be a historian or not, but today I am here anyways. I wish to thank all the organizers, especially the students who have been working so hard, morning to evening, the department faculty who have been kind enough to, invite me,
for the
Yeah,
and
okay, so the faculty which has been kind enough to invite me, or a lot of you who have come from probably very far away in different parts of Delhi, who have been like I'm overwhelmed by finding such audience. I've never seen students listening to me sitting on. So it makes me feel very great, but I'm also scared that I have something meaningful to say, and I hope so. There are people who know this subject far better than me, who have already spoken, who are sitting here. Anyways, I'll start with last 15 or 20 years of the field of medieval Indian history has been marked by the emergence of a lot of works. Not a lot of them are Raj, Dakhini, Khadi Boli, Avdi. Then you have sources in Punjabi. Then you have even people who have worked on Bangla and Marathi sources. My concern here would primarily be with the Hindi-Urdu family, with Punjabi and Rajasthani, which have been referred to as Marwari, Bengal, and so on and so forth. And this presentation will largely be an overview, trying to take a stock of what really has happened over the last 15-20 years and trying to make sense of it. So first of all, why did this not happen earlier? So let's look back at the stalwarts of Mughal history. People who laid out the field in the early 20th century. Whether you look at people from Aligarh or somebody like Jadunath Sarkar, we find very little reliance on non-Persian sources. In fact, Jadunath Sarkar, who is now seen to be more as a nationalist historian, Jadunath Sarkar very clearly writes that we cannot trust any of these sources, whether they are Marathi sources, whether they are Rajasthani sources. His very close collaborator, Raghuveer Singh, does use these sources, but again, they remain marginal to the writing of medieval Indian history. Not to say that people did not know about them. They were Indologists. People coming to Rajasthan primarily, people working on Hindi literature, both Indian and European. Figures like James Todd, Tessitori. Then you have this entire gamut of people working on Hindi literature. Usually people like the brothers who wrote the history of Hindi Sahitya. I forget whether they were Misra Bandhus or not. I'm sorry about that. But so then Maithili Sharan Gupta. So a lot of these people, these sources were there in public knowledge, but they were not used by historians. That's what I'm trying to say here. Again, the entire Sikh corpus was also available, but for whatever reason, the entire body of Sikh religious or non-religious texts written in Gurmukhi have remained disconnected with the writing of, say, mainstream medieval Indian history. And that is our loss, not only. So let us see what kind of sources do we have. First of all, one must point out that the Rajasthani sources stand out because not only are they rich, but they also provide us a lot of data of the revenue records, records of state intelligence. For lack of a better word, Bhakia Navees or intelligence bureau records. These kind of records are available in Rajasthan, which you may find in Maharashtra. I'm not aware. As I said, I will be dealing with Rajasthan, Punjab, North India. Whether such records exist in other parts of India, I stay away from that. I do think they might be available in Marathi. But in Rajasthani, you certainly have village revenue records, local level court cases, and intelligence records. Basically reports from the Delhi Darbar or from various other places of what's going on. Other than that, primarily this so to speak, vernacular, I mean, it's not the best term, it gives a wrong impression. I think we can't really call any of these languages vernacular, but vernacular record is primarily cultural in its nature. Whether you call it religious texts, whether you call them literary texts, whether you call them historical texts. So, for example, Raso literature in Rajasthan, or love poetry, Premakhyan kind of texts, or a text like, say, the Padmavat, or the Ramcharitmanas, or Kutub Mushtari, or Heer Ranjha, Waris Shah's Heer. A variety of these texts are either, you can characterize them as romance poetry. I mean, the texts are far richer than this, but I'm just giving you some easy labels to work with. So, romance poetry, then you have religious records or religious texts, whether the kind of text that Professor Boguna was talking about earlier today, or many other similar texts from different other sects. I worked with some texts of the Pranami Sampradaya, the Laldas Pitak specifically. I think you were referring to as Laldasis in your Laldas is something else. Okay. Okay. So the Laldas Pitak is from around early around 1700. So then you have historical texts also. Again, these come from primarily from Rajasthan or Kadipoli. Then you also have texts like the Janam Sakhis, which come from the Gurmukhi or Punjabi tradition. And a lot of these literary and historical texts also have an element of what may be today called fantasy, things like Guru Nanak flying to Mecca. But nevertheless, these are records that we have, and have not been used by us. Lately, over the first person who probably took these records seriously was, I think, Satish Chandra, then Dilbag Singh, and B.L. Bhatani at Aligarh. And here within Delhi University, Sandhya Sharma wrote a book on medieval Hindi poetry. Nandita Prasad Sahai again worked on the Rajasthani records and what they reveal about day-to-day life. And Alison Bush in the United States was probably the one whose book made a bigger impact in this field. So primarily what we can say is that these, if you look at how can medieval Indian history be touched by this kind of record, then we see that they add an element of data for especially studies of rural society, rural economy, agrarian economy, which is hinted towards in Irfan Hamid's agrarian system, but it certainly makes it a far more rich enterprise if you include these records. Other than that, does it really change how we understand medieval India? I mean, I am more interested in, say, political history, political sociology, political culture of 17th century India, and does it really make us understand any of the ways in which we understand 17th century political history or political structure of India in the 17th century? That's the main concern that I have. So to my mind, it does certainly supplement the large data which is already available and utilized in Persian as far as political history or political culture is concerned. But what it gives an advantage in is in accessing various new dimensions of political history or political culture. Some of the things which were indicated to by Dr. Bhogana. So, for example, what was the nature of political authority? We have a whole range of political authorities, from the Zamindar to the Sultan or Badshah. How are they perceived in outside the Persian documents, which can be called documents of the Mughal regime, official documents? How are these figures perceived? That's something that certainly you can see through some of these documents. Then again, what is the image or the understanding of the figure of the Badshah? Irrespective of whether it is Aurangzeb or Akbar or Shah Jahan or anybody else. What is the popular understanding of these figures or this office or this institution of the Badshah in medieval India? And this can give us an opportunity to go beyond the understanding of the political culture of medieval India, which is primarily still based on readings of the Ain-e-Akbari and Abul Fazl. The Mansabdari system and the injunctions laid out in the Ain-e-Akbari still are the primary method through which we understand the political culture of medieval India, which is, in my opinion, not only fairly limited but also inadequate for a deeper understanding of medieval India. And so, for example, you have various texts like not only the Kitab-e-Noras or Kutub-Mushtari, the Padmavat, Ramcharitmanas, or the Rasul literature, which do indicate what are the understandings of an ideal ruler in medieval India outside of the Persian corpus. And I think we need to access these worldviews or political worldviews as well. So, so eventually, I would like to look at, as my field of studies, late 17th century. So if we look at a variety of texts that come through in the second half of 17th century, then we can also see an understanding of the Mughal Badshah or Aurangzeb during this period, whether we look at it through the Lal Das Pitak or say the Zafarnama, which is written by Guru Gobind Singh, or Bhushan's poetry, which was written for Shivaji, and for understanding this, it gives us, this data is also useful for understanding what exactly does the term Hindu mean in the second half of 17th century. So, who are included in the term Hindu when this term is used? Where is this term used? Is it used in Persian sources? Is it used in non-Persian sources? Is it used in non-Persian sources? And we will see that primarily this term is used in Persian sources, not in non-Persian sources. And it is usually used to refer to people who are closer to the Mughal regime rather than those who are far away from the Mughal regime. Today, Professor Bhogna was discussing the Bairagis. The Bairagis are not referred to as Hindus, and so we also have here the very interest. So what do the Hindus in the Mughal court? How do they deal with the other population of India? So for example, we saw a discussion on the Jaipur regime, where the Jaipur regime is, for example, what sort of relations does it have with various other sects which have come about as anti-state or rebellious? So we see that the Kachwa regime has relations with the Sikh, emergent Sikhs. The Bangla Sahib Gurdwara here in Delhi is built on land donated by the Jaipur state. And but at the same time, the Jaipur state has an entire body of intelligence documents on Banda Bairagi, who succeeds. The published collection of documents is, fairly fat. It would hurt somebody if you hit them with it. So they are also keeping an eye on the Sikhs. And similarly, you have. If you look at, say, the Zafarnama, Guru Gobind Singh does write there that you and I are both Budh Shikan, or idol breakers, and yet you are teaming up or helping the hill Rajas who are Budh Parasts. This is an open letter to Aurangzeb that Guru Gobind Singh has written. Similarly, if you look at Shivaji, he claims that he is a Hindu Badshah. Now, what does he mean by Hindu Badshah is an open-ended question. Does he mean he is a Badshah who is a Hindu or is a Badshah of the Hindus? That we will never be able to figure out. Probably, and so similarly, you have many other people who are trying to. So Shivaji, if you look at it, Shivaji has reached Agra. To strike up a political deal with the Mughal regime. It is another issue that he fails in that, or his overtures are rejected. Similarly, you have the Laldas Pitak, where another, for lack of a better word, another Hindu Sant, Mahamati Prannath, is reaching Aurangzeb's Darbar and trying to ally with him. His offer is that I will be Krishna and you be my Arjun. Obviously, Aurangzeb's people don't let him into the Darbar, and so they don't let him in, not because of references to, just to be clear, they don't allow him not because of references to Arjun and Krishna, but because Aurangzeb cannot be, he could have been a Krishna, but he can't be an Arjun, just to be clear. So there are other figures also who seek alliances with the Mughal state. There are various levels of reference, various levels of engagement that you see there. And at one level, all of these people are also replicating the self-image that Aurangzeb is propagating through the Mughal Empire, which is pretty close to what Professor Bahuguna was talking. Sant Surma or Sant Sipahi. Aurangzeb is also trying to portray himself as Zinda Pir or Mystic. So you find this resonance in the people who are rebelling against Aurangzeb's regime as well. They are also trying to cast themselves into a similar mold. And in fact, all of them, whether it is Mahamati Prannath, Ram Rai, who is a Sikh guru that rivals Guru Gobind Singh, or Guru Gobind Singh, or the Bairagis or Dadu Dayal, except for Shivaji and the Hindu Rajputs, everybody in the political landscape is claiming to be something similar to a Sant Sipahi, except for Shivaji and the Hindu Rajputs. And I would just like to stop by saying that I think we need to adopt new approaches to writing the political history or socio-political history of Mughal India, and our effort should be to see how incomparable terms, which are Hindu and Muslim, become comparable. As they are incomparable because one is a philosophical, derived from an idea of Islam, which is not an ethnic term. Muslim is, not an ethnic term. Hindu is an ethnic term, but eventually by the 18th, 19th, whenever you want to trace it, there is a transition. Both of these terms become comparable. So how does this transition happen? I think that is where the secret to, writing more meaningful history, political histories of medieval India lies. I probably have raised a lot of contentious issues, but I've already done that, so let us see how I get to speak. Thank you. And just last thing, I finished on time because I wouldn't mind the question. I finished on time.
Thank you, Dr. Rathee. Thank you, Dr. Rathee, and
Switched off.
thank you also for time.
Is it switched off? Dipanshi, is it switched off?
Last without the speaker. With last and without the speaker. Yeah. Okay, so now we'll invite questions, comments. The mic. We now invite questions, comments.
The mic is on, I think it's the mask.
Questions, comments, and we'll go in the reverse order. So we'll begin with Dr. Rathee.
Question is for Sanghamitra, ma'am. Oh, but it's I want to.
So, questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about the use of the term vernacular and why you said it's not appropriate or not adequate in this context.
Vernacular is often opposed to cosmopolitan, and it is not really that the so-called non-Persian texts are only being read in the village or are the oral texts. They are being patronized by fairly well-off people, including rulers in the Mughal court and in the smaller courts. So I mean, that indicates that they are not really. I mean, often vernacular is equal to people's voice. So I'm just saying that they are not necessarily people's voice. They are also patronized by wealthy, well-to-do sections. That's all.
So this is a very insightful session. I loved all the talks. My question is to Dr. Vikas Rathee, and I just wanted to ask, although you did say you focus on the political, social-political aspects, my question is, how has the vernacular term changed or added to our understanding of gender in medieval India?
I would really should be frank enough and say that that's not really my focus. I want to get questions which I can answer. I don't want to pretend I know.
So you gave the example of Bhushan and how use of sources like that can perhaps enrich our understanding of the political history of the time. If you can perhaps tell us a little bit more about, say, for instance, in writing a certain text like in Rijimi Jamupar Padas Wamupar. So how exactly is the history?
I haven't really.
Because of lack of time, we have to disturb.
No, I'm. So could you repeat that? I couldn't really follow you because you were too close to the microphone.
So you give the specific example of Bhushan in your speech. How, using texts like Bhushan.
I haven't really used Bhushan. I use Rajasthani literary historical texts, which deal with, say, the ones I read were about 1658. And they tell you a different way of understanding the Mughal regime. They are least bothered about the outcome of the war. 1658. They frankly don't care whether Shah Jahan or Dara Shikoh or Aurangzeb stays on the throne. At least the ones I read. So they are not I mean, what we kind of expect that, every, and the concern with the Chahat is not very high also. They just see that as, part of their evolving political situation. They have to go and maybe take part in the section, a lot of time on the war of succession. These guys will deal with it, just like that. And many other Hindi texts are not even bothered. So the Laldas, which is an account of the 17th century, does not talks about Aurangzeb's regime and visits Aurangzeb's Shahjahanabad and so on and so forth. But nowhere do they talk about Dara Shikoh or the War of Succession. It is a fairly instrumental understanding of the Mughal regime that, we had this work, so we ended up in Delhi, and this is what Delhi was like, and we met this guy, we met that guy, and so on. So a lot of things that we feel would be a matter of concern for these people they are not bothered by the inner struggles of the Mughal ruling family.
So, what exactly did the term?
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I have a question for you. What exactly did the term Hindu mean in the 17th century?
नहीं बोल रही So what
Dipanshi, Mike.
So what exactly does the term Hindu mean in the 17th century? I will not get into that because I will answer your question. But I only want to tell you that in the 17th century the term Hindu is primarily being used in Persian texts. It is a term used by the Persian literary historical genre to refer to people of India, which in some cases can include Muslims as well, in the 17th century. But in the non-Persian world, the term Hindu is not used that often, or it is accompanied, equally used with, say, terms like Rajput or Bairagi or something else. The term Hindu is not so. At least the text that I read, I feel that Persian is the language where the term Hindu is used far more. And I also feel it is a term which often refers to people closer to the Mughal regime, the Hindus serving in the Mughal regime, not it. So Jats will be Jats, Bairagis will be Bairagis. The people working for the Mughal regime, the Mughal bureaucracy, which is Hindu, as we understand Hindu today, they will be usually referred to as Hindu in the Persian texts.
सबसे पीछे सबसे कॉर्नर में चिन्ह तो
I think that the rise of vernacular languages and the rise of regional empires are coincident.
Sorry, repeat.
I think that the rise of vernacular literature and the rise of regional empires like Rohilkhand, Murshidabad, and Bengal and Gujarat, the rise of vernacular and these empires are coincident. They all reflect states of the administrative and political order of the Mughal Empire. But how they give rise to vernacular language, not of the Persian literature or Persian method of historical writing, please.
So the rise of smaller kingdoms in 18th century, that's what you are, and their cultural, what is the cultural counterpart to this political development? That's I get that is what you are asking me. One thing that has to be said is that by the 18th century, especially when you look at Aurangzeb and everybody trying to as I understand, a lot of rebels against Aurangzeb's regime are trying to become like him, Sant Sipahi or Zinda Peer, you know. So they are trying to. So the Mughal emperor does become, you know, a symbolic figure. The funny thing is that the Mughal emperor, there are rebellions against the Mughal emperor when the Mughal regime is at its peak. But in the 18th and 19th century, nobody cares about the Mughal emperor, but they want him to be sitting there, you know. So at the same time, there are internal strifes, which you see in 18th century. Now you're asking, I can't say about whether Murshidabad promotes Bengali or, I mean, certainly the Marathas promote Marathi, and you know, the Sikhs are promoting not only Punjabi but other languages also, and I presume the same for Marathas. So I do think multicultural or multilingual patronage to multilinguistic writing is to be found in all of these kingdoms. And as far as history writing goes, or Tarikh Nigari sinks deeper, and you increasingly find with 18th and 19th century micro Tarikh are being written. So by the 19th century, you will find Tarikhs like Tarikh-e-Faridkot, Tarikh-e-Jhajjar, and so on and so forth, which you will not find something, a counterpart to this will not be found in the earlier period. So history writing, especially including in Hindi, I believe I have seen a Tarikh-e-Jaisalmer or a Tarikh-e-Bardmer in Hindi also in late 19th century. So the historical background to your political regime, which may be based on a certain ethnicity or not, oftentimes it is. So Tarikh-e-Faridkot, for example, is the second name for it is Tarikh-e-Barad Vansh. Barad is like B-R-A-R, or you know, it's a Jat clan. And the Tarikh-e-Jhajjar is also at the same time a genealogy of certain Baloch or Afghan clans. So writing history very micro regions and smaller ethnic groups becomes more common after the decline or after the heyday of the Mughal Empire. And this you will see in Bengal also. Tarikh-e-Bangala is written in the late 18th century. You know, so smaller histories are written, and these regional will become even smaller district level history by 19th century. Thank you.
We will now move to the comments and questions for the next speaker, Dr. Sanghamitra.
Hello, ma'am. In your paper, you discussed about how Garo and later Bhils were pursued by the British lawmakers and the administrators. So my question is quite straight and on the lines that how narrative currents in the social sphere play a key role in generalizing or shaping the identity of a specific group.
I have a question back. What is the narrative currents in the social sphere? What can you be a little more specific? Like what is the narrative?
Ma'am, please take the mic.
How they
What is the narrative current in the social sphere? I'm just to know what I'm answering.
I want to ask that how things going on in the society about that the Garo and the Bhils or the tribes, how the current of the or the things going around in the society made the particularly to generalize that those tribes.
Yeah. I think that,
Non-Garo society. Is it non-Garo society?
He's speaking specifically about Garo and Bhils.
In your paper you discussed about Garo.
Yeah. No, I think I was, I mean, if I get your question right, I mean, I think I have already, it probably just needs a little bit, I have talked about it in the presentation, but I think maybe I can just, explain it in a little more detail. What I'm talking about, what I think you understand, what you're calling society is what I call rebellion, I mean what I could get, the land tenure system, what was changing, let's say, around that time, that what specific reference to Garos and Bills comes in the context of the Pagalpanthi rebellion, right? So what you're calling society, I would call, that world of the agriculture is that is getting transformed by the coming in of colonial rule, right? So what, so there's this a very long, like a decade-long history of immense change that comes in this area, right? And as a result of which there is resistance. And what I was basically trying to say is that communities, like the bills, which it's a very it's a comparison which I'm just drawing to show that they too clearly were losing their forest reserve, the kinds of claims that they had, and then it becomes a much larger collective umbrella term for many communities that resist. Similar. So when you say bills, you're not referring to necessarily one ethnic community, but a much larger, or ethnicity itself is being redefined. So similarly here with the Garo, the term is now, it could mean many people. That people who otherwise probably have called themselves, coaches or ajams, or in this case, people, he belongs to actually a tradition of Muslim, kind of, so it's a very Islamic kind of history that he has. I cannot go into it here, but he's a peer. I mean, so there is a how does such a person call himself? It was more that it is defined in resistance. So it's a term that it doesn't have to necessarily imply one ethnic group.
I get your point that in order to understand colonial transformation, we need to go back to the pre-colonial period. But what is not very clear to me is how to construct the pre-colonial history through the colonial archive. And I think because the archive or the evidence comes from the colonial archive, you can easily build a history of rupture quite easily. And miss history of rupture and miss out the long-term continuities, for which I think the colonial archive is clearly inadequate.
I think it's both, but I would disagree in the sense that actually it's surprising how much continuity the colonial archive emphasizes on. It really depends on what you're looking at. So if you're looking at something like, like say the Ahom Empire, I mean, it is being created in the archive to an extent. The idea of a long history of an empire over 600 years is very much colonial. So there is continuity, and they will have to, deploy that strategy to legitimize. But when you're talking about, I mean, that's what I'm saying. It is not. That's why the pre-colonial for me is not just the colonial archive. There is a lot of, there are this middle space, the 1760s only, where you actually have a lot of European traders coming in. There are, for example, the Chevalier, this guy who's trading as a private Frenchman with, he leaves behind these accounts, which give you, and then you can follow it up with early East India Company official 70s, 70s, 80s reports, which are not directly, kind of implicated in conflicts. So they are, they are at that moment, there's still a distance. So you can, yes, I can still mediate it, and there are interests, but there is a possibility of recovery, yeah. I think we just need to kind of open up the archive more. I think the problems that you're saying are completely arises more with the 19th century archive. The 18th century is completely different still. It's still a state, kind of, I mean, while they are, kind of, obviously there's capital punishment, there's disruption, there's all of it. It is a state, but it is also, in the making. So you can capture, I think,
Right, questions for Mr. Alok, Prasad?
Question, please.
Questions coming?
Used try and fast interchangeably in your paper, and partly the colonial administration as much uses this interchangeably, and yet there are certain disruptions. If the accent is on kinship, you have mentioned that also in relation to caste endogamy, the criminality is attributed to intercaste marriages or Meena Pasi kind of interrelation. Again, when you had mentioned about the Pasi community as simple cultivators, I was wondering whether it also has to do with colonial revenue administration, where a certain relation to territory also defines the difference between tribe and caste, but it is your blood. So how do you, explain or elaborate?
The first question, you said that I use the terms tribal caste interchangeably. That's not true. See, in the official classification and in official language, certain groups, gangs, and castes, they were together called criminal tribes. So the word that is used officially is tribe, and it includes gangs, it includes castes, it also includes several different types of communities. So one such criminal tribe was a Pasi caste, right? So criminal tribe is an official word which includes several types of groups. Right? So this distinction, I think, maybe very clear. I didn't use interchange. What was the second question, please?
In relation to territory and settlement.
Okay. I think it flows from the first question. So you said about possibility. I said we were cultivating caste. No, because I didn't say about Pasis. I said about the Mio community. The Mio community is being studied in detail by Shail Myran in this book, Against History and State. And in that book, it's mentioned that the Mio community in the early British ethnographic understanding comes out as a cultivating caste. So they were cultivators. But because they continue to resist the British, so therefore the British wanted to have this reasonable ground for branding them as criminal, so that their mobility, their occupation, their economic life can be restricted, they can be almost immobilized and kept in ceremony. So therefore, what the British did was they transformed in their classification something which was a cultivating caste in the early 19th century. It was in the late 19th century classified as a criminal caste, or the criminal tribe officially speaking, criminal tribe, on the grounds that among the Neos, one of their ancestors several decades back had married, prominent ancestor of course, had married a woman from Meena community. Now Meena community was clearly from the very beginning branded as a criminal tribe, and since the one prominent ancestor, although of course a long time in the past, married one person from criminal caste, therefore this entire Neo community was also, they were all innocent, but they were branded as criminal tribe. So I'm just looking, just explaining how criminality was defined and in a very arbitrary manner.
We have time for just one more question. Yeah.
Sir, thank you so much for this insightful presentation. I have a question, not on Pasi caste, but on Gujar Bakrawal tribe, which was also denotified as a criminal tribe, the largest Muslim tribe in India and the third largest ethnic community in Jammu and Kashmir. Sir, I just want to know from your field work and your professional experience and the literature you have read, because I am also doing my research on a tribe. So I just want to know that because this particular community on which I am working, this is a nomadic tribe moving for the meadows from lower areas to high reaches of Pir Panjab. So can you, are there some patterns, because there is very much subjectivity in denotifying that particular, because those particular officials which were powerful enough to denotify that particular tribe or caste. So sir, are there some patterns on the basis of which these particular tribes or castes were denotified as criminal? Because this particular community has almost negligible presence in the public sphere and the economic spaces. So, yeah.
I don't know much about the community that you're talking about. But, as far as notifying a community as criminal, that was a very easy process. According to Meena, I don't know much about the community that you're talking about, but regarding the process of notification, notification was done very easily. According to Meena, that is the best, the easiest way to notify any community as was, practically speaking, was that if the local landed zamindars, they colluded with the police officers and created some disturbance in the area, then usually the marginalized communities would be notified as a criminal community. So it was very easy and arbitrary process. Regarding the denotification, it was a very technically also a very, very difficult process, because after notification, the review could be taken up only by a first-class magistrate, and even there, the commissioner of that area was to actually also has to give consent. It's a power to review. So denotification was a very difficult process. And usually communities were notified, and there were more than 200 communities. I think this is one area of research which will take, because only about 5-10 communities have been studied in these criminal tribes. So I think if we can have study more on these tribes, then it will be very, I think some of the patterns of history, some knowledge about rather, it will have to be modified and revised. I didn't answer the question, sorry. But thank you. Thank you. Since we are really short of time, I'll refrain from saying anything. I'd like to thank our panelists and participants for a very animated discussion. And now, request the organizer.
As we bring this enlightening session to a close, it is our pleasure to invite our administrative team, who has been an important part of this glorious history of 100 years, Shiv Prasad ji and Durga Rai ji, to join us on stage for the felicitation ceremony. We would like to extend our gratitude to our esteemed chair, Professor Amar Farooqui, and all our remarkable speakers who have graced us with their invaluable insights and knowledge.
सत्यार्थ सत्यार्थ वो जो माइक है ना माइक स्टैंड वो हटा ही दे, हटा के उधर कोने में रख दो.
Just a little bit of a disappointment, not a little bit, a big disappointment. We have heard from Mr. Tanika Sarkar that neither she nor Sumit Sarkar will be able to make it today because neither of them, I mean, she is not feeling too well, she has some problems and health problems, and Sumit Sarkar is also not able to come. So we miss them very much, and she sends our profuse apologies for missing the event.
Anybody who's not happy, please. Anybody who's not happy, please. You help yourself. Or we'll help you. Don't help yourself. Because once you go out, there's chaos.